I was staring at the violation notice taped to my front door when I realized my Tuesday was about to get a whole lot more complicated than I had planned. The bright yellow paper fluttered in the morning breeze, practically screaming its presence to the entire neighborhood in Gilbert, Arizona. I ripped it off and scanned the contents, my coffee growing cold in my other hand. According to this official-looking document from the Saguaro Heights Homeowners Association, I was in violation of Section 8.4.2 of the HOA bylaws regarding unsightly commercial equipment storage and fire hazards. The violation: my welding cart that I had wheeled outside yesterday afternoon and apparently forgotten to put back in the garage before sunset. I am Jason Vickers, a 34-year-old fabrication specialist who works from home 3 days a week, and I had lived in this cookie-cutter subdivision for exactly 18 months. The cart in question was a standard Miller welding cart with my oxygen and acetylene tanks secured properly, positioned neatly against the side of my house near the garage door. I had been working on a custom railing project for a client and simply ran out of daylight. The cart had been outside for maybe 14 hours, tops. The notice demanded I remove the hazardous industrial equipment immediately and attend a mandatory HOA board meeting on Thursday evening at 7. It was signed by Patricia Morrison, HOA president, with a CC to someone named Deborah Fletcher, compliance officer. I crumpled the paper slightly in my fist, took a deep breath, and reminded myself that losing my temper would not help the situation. I walked around to the side of my house where the cart stood exactly where I had left it. Everything was secure. The tanks were chained to the cart properly. The regulators were in good condition. The hoses were coiled neatly. This setup was cleaner than half the professional shops I had visited. I had been welding for 12 years, ever since I took a vocational class in high school, and safety was practically burned into my DNA at this point. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was my neighbor, Marcus Chen, from 3 houses down. "Dude, did you get a violation notice too?" he asked without preamble. "Yeah, just found it." "What did they get you for?" "My basketball hoop. Apparently it is too close to the street. I measured it last year when I installed it." It is exactly where the bylaws say it can be, but Patricia says it is an eyesore and needs to be moved back another 3 feet, which would put it in the middle of my driveway and make it useless. I sighed. This is the 3rd time this year she has gone on a power trip. 5th for the neighborhood, Marcus corrected. The Hendersons got cited for their mailbox being the wrong shade of beige. The Coopers got fined because their dog barked at 6 in the morning, which apparently violated quiet hours that end at 7. Never mind that their dog was barking at a coyote trying to get into their yard. We talked for a few more minutes, commiserating about the increasingly aggressive HOA enforcement. After hanging up, I decided to be proactive. I called Southwestern Welding Supply, the place where I bought most of my equipment, and got my tanks refilled. The owner, Bill Rodriguez, had been in the welding business for over 30 years. "Bill, quick question," I said when he answered. "If I sent you a picture of my torch cart setup, could you tell me if it meets standard safety protocols?" "Sure thing, Jason. What is this about?" I explained the situation, and I could practically hear him shaking his head through the phone. "Send me the picture. I will get back to you in an hour." I took several photos of the cart from different angles, showing the tank restraints, the regulators, the condition of the hoses, and the overall setup. I sent them to Bill and then wheeled the cart back into my garage, not because I thought I was wrong, but because I did not want to give Patricia any more ammunition. 45 minutes later, Bill called back. "Jason, your setup is not just safe. It actually matches the configuration we use in our warehouse. The tank restraints are commercial grade, your regulators are properly installed, and everything is in excellent condition. If your HOA is calling this a fire hazard, they do not know what they are talking about. I can write you a letter if you need it. That would be amazing, Bill. I have to go to a board meeting on Thursday. I will have it ready by Wednesday. Come by the shop anytime and pick it up. And Jason, I have dealt with HOA nonsense before at my own house. Document everything. Take photos, keep emails, record conversations if Arizona law allows it. These things can get ugly fast. I thanked him and spent the next hour researching Arizona HOA laws. As a one-party consent state, I could legally record conversations I was part of. I also discovered that HOAs had significant power, but they were not unlimited. They had to follow their own bylaws, and they could not create rules that contradicted safety regulations or common sense without proper procedures. That afternoon, I drafted a formal response to the violation notice, explaining that the equipment was temporarily stored outside due to an ongoing project, that it met all safety standards, and that it had been returned to the garage. I printed 2 copies, kept one for my records, and hand-delivered the other to Patricia Morrison's house at the end of the block. Her home was the largest in the neighborhood, a 2-story with an immaculate lawn that looked like it had been manicured with nail scissors. I rang the doorbell and waited. A woman in her mid-50s opened the door, her blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun, wearing a crisp white blouse despite it being a casual Tuesday afternoon. "Yes," she said, not quite rudely but not warmly either. "Mrs. Morrison, I am Jason Vickers from 4287 Saguaro Heights Drive. I received a violation notice this morning and wanted to deliver my formal response." She took the paper from my hand without looking at it. "The violation notice is self-explanatory, Mr. Vickers. Commercial equipment is not permitted to be stored outside. It is in the bylaws. With respect, it was not commercial equipment. It is personal welding equipment that I use for my job, and it was outside temporarily while I was working on a project. It has been returned to my garage. The bylaws make no distinction between commercial and personal equipment of that nature. It was visible from the street, and multiple residents complained." "Multiple residents," I kept my voice even. "May I ask who complained? That information is confidential." "I see. Well, my response letter outlines that the equipment meets all safety standards. I will be at the board meeting on Thursday to discuss this further." "There is nothing to discuss, Mr. Vickers. The violation stands. You will receive information about the fine schedule in the mail." She started to close the door. "Mrs. Morrison, I have been a welder for 12 years. That equipment is safer than most household grills. I am willing to provide documentation from a licensed welding supply company. The board is not interested in your opinions about safety, Mr. Vickers. We are interested in compliance with our community standards. Good day." The door clicked shut, and I stood there for a moment, feeling my blood pressure rising. I walked back to my house, already composing an email to the other board members. The Saguaro Heights HOA had 5 board members. Patricia Morrison as president, Deborah Fletcher as compliance officer, Tom Henderson as treasurer, Linda Myers as secretary, and George Patterson as a general board member. I had met Tom briefly at a neighborhood barbecue, and he had seemed reasonable enough. I spent Tuesday evening crafting a detailed email to all 5 board members, attaching photos of my equipment setup, explaining my profession, and requesting a fair hearing at the Thursday meeting. I cited specific sections of the Arizona revised statutes regarding HOA powers and limitations. I was polite but firm, making it clear I was not going to be pushed around without cause. Wednesday morning, I drove to Southwestern Welding Supply. Bill had the letter ready, printed on company letterhead and notarized. It stated that my torch cart setup met or exceeded industry safety standards, and that similar configurations were used in professional welding supply warehouses, including his own. He had even attached photos of his warehouse setup, which was remarkably similar to mine. "Thanks, Bill. I really appreciate this." "No problem. Listen, Jason, I have been thinking about this. If they keep pushing, you might want to contact a lawyer who specializes in HOA disputes. I know a guy. Dealt with my HOA 3 years ago when they tried to fine me for running a business from my home, even though I just had an office and never had customers coming to the house. His name is Robert Kaplan, and he is based in Mesa." I took the contact information, hoping I would not need it but grateful to have it. On my way home, I stopped at Office Depot and made several copies of Bill's letter, organizing them in a folder along with my other documentation. That evening, I received a response from Tom Henderson, the treasurer. His email was brief but encouraging. "Jason, I reviewed your email and photos. Your concerns seem valid. I will ensure we discuss this properly at Thursday's meeting. See you then." No one else responded. Thursday arrived with the oppressive heat that Arizona is famous for in June. I spent the day working on another project, a set of custom brackets for a commercial client, but my mind kept drifting to the evening meeting. At 6:30, I put on a collared shirt, grabbed my documentation folder, and drove to the community center at the entrance of the subdivision. The Saguaro Heights Community Center was a small beige building that matched every other structure in the neighborhood. Inside, there was a main room with a kitchenette, a conference room, and a small office. The board meetings were held in the conference room, which had a long table at the front for the board members and rows of chairs for residents. When I arrived at 6:45, about 20 other residents were already seated. I recognized Marcus Chen, who gave me a supportive nod. There were several other people I had seen around the neighborhood but did not know personally. At the front table, Patricia Morrison sat in the center seat, looking every bit the queen surveying her subjects. Deborah Fletcher sat to her right, a thin woman in her early 50s with dark hair streaked with gray and an expression that suggested she had just smelled something unpleasant. To Patricia's left were Tom Henderson, Linda Myers, and George Patterson. Patricia called the meeting to order at exactly 7 o'clock. She went through the standard preliminary business, approving the minutes from the last meeting and discussing the community's financial status. Then she moved to the violations and compliance section. "We have several outstanding violations to discuss," Patricia began, glancing at a paper in front of her. "Mr. Marcus Chen, you have been cited for improper placement of recreational equipment. Mr. Jason Vickers, you have been cited for storage of hazardous commercial equipment in violation of our community standards." She went through a few other violations, mostly minor things like trash cans left out too long or weeds in flower beds. Then she opened the floor for responses. Marcus went first, presenting his measurements and the original bylaws. Patricia barely looked at his documentation before declaring that the board would take it under advisement and issue a ruling within 10 days. Marcus looked frustrated but sat down without further argument. Then it was my turn. I stood up, folder in hand, and walked to the front of the room. "Mrs. Morrison, board members, thank you for allowing me to address this violation. I believe there has been a misunderstanding." I opened my folder and pulled out the photos. This is the equipment in question. It is a standard welding torch cart with oxygen and acetylene tanks. I am a professional fabrication specialist, and I use this equipment regularly for my work." Patricia held up her hand. "Mr. Vickers, we are aware of what the equipment is. That does not change the fact that it was stored outside in violation of our bylaws. I understand the concern about outdoor storage, but I would like to present evidence that this equipment is safe and was only outside temporarily. I have a letter here from Southwestern Welding Supply." I handed copies to each board member. As you can see, their owner, who has been in the welding business for over 30 years, states that my setup not only meets industry safety standards but actually matches the configuration used in their professional warehouse. Tom Henderson read the letter carefully, nodding. "This seems pretty thorough, Patricia. If a professional welding supply company says the setup is safe, I think we should reconsider the hazardous designation." Patricia did not even look at the letter. "The issue is not whether Mr. Vickers thinks his equipment is safe. The issue is that it was visible from the street and violates our aesthetic standards. We cannot have industrial equipment cluttering our neighborhood." "It was not cluttering anything," I said, keeping my voice level. "It was positioned neatly against my house, near my garage, and it was only outside for about 14 hours because I was working late on a project. It is now stored in my garage where it belongs." Deborah Fletcher spoke for the first time, her voice sharp. "Mr. Vickers, you seem to think that your convenience outweighs community standards. Many of us work hard to maintain the appearance and safety of this neighborhood. When you moved here, you agreed to follow the HOA rules." "I did agree to follow reasonable rules," I replied. "But I do not agree to follow rules that are applied arbitrarily or without basis in fact. This equipment is safe. It was outside temporarily. Calling it a hazard is simply inaccurate." Patricia's expression hardened. "Mr. Vickers, you are out of order. The board has made its decision. The violation stands. You will be fined $500, payable within 30 days. If you have the equipment outside again, the fine will increase to $1,000 per occurrence. This matter is closed. With respect, Mrs. Morrison, you have not made a decision. You have made a declaration without considering the evidence. I am formally requesting that this matter be put to a vote of the full board." Tom Henderson cleared his throat. "Patricia, I think that is a reasonable request. We should vote." Patricia glared at Tom but could not refuse without appearing completely autocratic. "Fine. All in favor of upholding the violation and fine." Patricia and Deborah raised their hands immediately. After a pause, Linda Myers raised her hand as well, though she looked uncomfortable. George Patterson stared at his hands and said nothing. "All opposed?" Tom raised his hand. George still did not move. "The motion carries 3-1 with one abstention," Patricia announced. "The violation stands. Next item of business." I stood there for a moment, feeling the anger rise in my chest. "This is not over, Mrs. Morrison. What you are doing is arbitrary enforcement, and it is not within the scope of the HOA's authority. Are you threatening this board, Mr. Vickers?" "I am informing you that I will be pursuing every legal avenue available to challenge this violation. Good evening." I walked out of the conference room, my face hot with frustration and embarrassment. Several residents followed me out, including Marcus. "Man, that was brutal," Marcus said. "She did not even look at your documentation." "She does not care about documentation. She cares about control." An older man I did not recognize approached me. "Mr. Vickers, I am Edward Sullivan. I live on the other side of the neighborhood. I want you to know that Patricia has been pulling this kind of thing for 2 years now. There are a lot of us who are fed up with her, but nobody has really challenged her. If you are serious about pushing back, you might have more support than you think." "I appreciate that, Mr. Sullivan. Right now, I need to figure out my next steps." I drove home and immediately called the lawyer Bill had recommended, Robert Kaplan. I reached his voicemail and left a detailed message about the situation. Then I sat down and started documenting everything from the beginning. When I had put the cart outside, when I received the violation notice, my conversation with Patricia, the board meeting, all of it. Robert Kaplan called me back Friday morning. I explained the entire situation, and he listened without interrupting. "Okay, Jason, here is the situation," he said when I finished. "HOAs have broad authority to enforce their bylaws, but they have to do so consistently and fairly. From what you are telling me, this seems like selective enforcement. The fact that she would not even consider professional documentation about safety is concerning. It suggests she is not acting in good faith. So what can I do? First, do not pay the fine yet. That does not mean ignore it, but do not pay it immediately. Second, I want you to file a formal written appeal with the board, citing inconsistent enforcement and requesting a hearing with an independent mediator. Arizona law allows for that in HOA disputes. Third, start gathering evidence of other potential violations in the neighborhood that have not been enforced. If we can show a pattern of selective enforcement, we have a much stronger case. What about the legal costs? My initial consultation is free. If we move forward, we can discuss options. Some HOA cases can be resolved quickly through formal appeals. Others take longer, but I think you have a good case, especially with that letter from the welding supply company. That was smart. We talked for another 20 minutes, and I felt slightly better by the end. At least I had a plan over the weekend. I drafted my formal appeal letter, citing specific Arizona statutes and HOA regulations. I also started walking around the neighborhood, taking photos. It did not take long to find inconsistencies. There were at least 6 basketball hoops in similar positions to Marcus's, none of which had been cited. I found 3 homes with work trucks parked in driveways overnight, which was technically a violation according to the bylaws but had never been enforced. One house had a storage shed that exceeded the size limit specified in the rules. I was not trying to get my neighbors in trouble. I was documenting that the HOA enforced rules selectively, targeting specific people while ignoring identical violations elsewhere. It was a pattern that would be important if this went to court. Monday morning, I hand-delivered my appeal letter to each board member's house. Patricia was not home, so I left it in her mailbox. By Monday evening, I received an email from her, CC'd to the entire board and the HOA's lawyer. "Mr. Vickers, your appeal has been received and denied. The board's decision is final. If you do not pay the fine within 30 days, additional late fees will be assessed, and we will pursue legal action to place a lien on your property. This matter is closed." I forwarded the email to Robert Kaplan, who called me back within an hour. "Well, this is actually good news," he said. "How is that good news?" "Because they denied your appeal without a hearing. That is a violation of Arizona HOA statutes. They are required to provide a fair hearing process. I am going to draft a response that puts them on notice. If they do not provide a proper hearing, we will file a lawsuit." Will that be expensive? It might not come to that. Sometimes just having a lawyer involved makes HOAs back down. They do not want the legal costs any more than you do. But if it does go to court, you have a strong case. The improper denial of your appeal, the inconsistent enforcement, the refusal to consider professional safety documentation, all of it points to a board that is not following proper procedures. Over the next week, Robert sent a formal letter to the HOA's lawyer, outlining the violations of procedure and demanding a proper hearing. The HOA's lawyer responded, essentially doubling down on their position. Robert filed a lawsuit in Maricopa County Superior Court, alleging improper HOA governance, selective enforcement, and failure to follow statutory requirements. The lawsuit filing seemed to light a fire under the neighborhood. Word spread quickly, and I started receiving calls and emails from other residents who had been targeted by Patricia's enforcement campaigns. The Hendersons, the couple who had been cited for their mailbox color, offered to be witnesses. A woman named Carol Webster, who I had not met before, contacted me to say that Patricia had fined her $800 because her front yard xeriscaping used too many decorative rocks and not enough approved desert plants, even though her landscaping was virtually identical to 6 other houses on her street. She is on a mission to control everything, Carol told me over the phone. I think she gets some kind of power trip from it. My husband and I were thinking about selling and moving just to get away from her. By the end of June, a group of about 15 residents had formed an informal coalition. We started calling ourselves the Saguaro Heights Homeowners Alliance, somewhat ironically. Edward Sullivan became the de facto organizer, setting up a group email chain and planning meetings. At our first meeting, held at Marcus Chen's house, the stories came pouring out. Tom Henderson, the board treasurer, showed up, which surprised everyone. "I need to say something," Tom began, looking uncomfortable. "I am still on the board and I probably should not be here, but I cannot stay silent anymore. Patricia has been abusing her authority for over a year. She decides who gets cited based on personal grudges. She has ignored multiple complaints about her own violations. Her backyard pergola exceeds the size limits in the bylaws by almost 30%, but when I brought it up at a board meeting, she shut me down and threatened to remove me from the board." "Can she do that?" someone asked. "Not legally, but she controls Deborah and Linda. They vote however she tells them to. George usually abstains from everything because he is scared of her. I have been trying to push back, but I am just one vote." "Why have not you resigned?" Carol asked. "Because if I do, she will replace me with someone who will rubber stamp everything she wants. At least now I can slow her down occasionally and provide some transparency." The revelation that a sitting board member was essentially admitting the president was corrupt sent shockwaves through the group. Several people urged Tom to go on record with a formal statement, but he was hesitant about the potential consequences. Meanwhile, the lawsuit was moving forward. In Arizona, civil cases can take months or years, but HOA disputes often move faster because they involve property rights and ongoing harm. Our court date for a preliminary hearing was set for mid-August. In July, things escalated. Patricia began issuing violation notices to almost everyone in the informal alliance. Carol got cited for having her trash cans visible from the street on a non-pickup day, even though it was because the garbage truck had missed her house and she had called the company to come back. Marcus got another citation, this time for his lawn being a 1/4 inch too long according to Patricia's measurement, though the HOA bylaws did not specify an exact height requirement. Edward Sullivan got cited for having a decorative flag hanging from his porch that was apparently not on the approved list of acceptable flag designs. It was clear she was retaliating, and Robert Kaplan was documenting every single instance. "This is actually helping our case," Robert told me during one of our updates. "Every time she issues one of these retaliatory violations, she is proving our argument about selective enforcement and abuse of authority. Keep documenting everything." The preliminary hearing in mid-August was held in a courtroom in downtown Phoenix. It was a strange experience, sitting in a formal courtroom over a welding cart. The judge was a woman in her 60s named Judge Marilyn Foster, and she had a reputation for not tolerating nonsense. Robert presented our case, outlining the improper procedures, the selective enforcement, and the retaliation against residents who dared to question the board's authority. The HOA's lawyer, a man named Richard Brenner, argued that the board had the authority to enforce community standards and that my equipment was a legitimate concern. Judge Foster listened to both sides and then asked to see the documentation. She spent several minutes reviewing Bill's letter from Southwestern Welding Supply, looking at the photos, and reading through the bylaws. "Mr. Brenner, I am struggling to understand how a temporarily stored welding cart that meets professional safety standards constitutes a violation worthy of a $500 fine," Judge Foster said. "The letter from the welding supply company is quite clear. Can you provide any expert testimony that contradicts this? Your Honor, the issue is not just safety. It is about community aesthetics and standards." "I understand that, but the violation notice specifically cited it as a fire hazard and dangerous equipment. If it is not actually hazardous, then the notice was misleading at best, fraudulent at worst." Richard Brenner looked flustered. "The board made a good faith determination based on the appearance of the equipment." Good faith would involve actually investigating whether the equipment was dangerous before labeling it as such. Did anyone from the HOA board consult with any welding professionals or safety experts before issuing this violation? "I do not believe so, Your Honor." "Then this does not sound like good faith. It sounds like an arbitrary decision. Furthermore, I am seeing a pattern of violations issued to residents who are part of this lawsuit or associated with the plaintiff. Can you explain why Mr. Chen received a citation for his lawn height when the bylaws do not specify a maximum height?" The hearing went on for another hour, and by the end, Judge Foster made a preliminary ruling. She ordered the HOA to suspend all fines and penalties related to my case and any of the associated cases filed by other residents until a full hearing could be held. She also ordered both sides to attempt mediation before returning to court. Walking out of the courthouse, I felt like I could breathe again for the first time in weeks. "That went well," Robert said. "Judge Foster clearly sees through their tactics. The mediation will be interesting." The mediation was scheduled for early September. In the meantime, an interesting thing happened. Patricia issued another round of violation notices, apparently not understanding or not caring that the judge had ordered a suspension. This time, she cited me for having a work vehicle in my driveway. The problem was, I did not have a work vehicle. I had a regular Toyota Tacoma that I occasionally used to transport materials, but it was a standard pickup truck with no commercial markings. It was the same type of vehicle that at least 30 other residents in the neighborhood drove. I immediately sent photos to Robert, along with documentation showing that identical vehicles were parked in driveways throughout the neighborhood without citations. Robert filed an emergency motion with the court, arguing that the HOA was violating the judge's order. Judge Foster was not happy. She called an emergency hearing for the following week and ordered Patricia Morrison and the HOA board to appear personally. At that hearing, Judge Foster was noticeably less patient. "Mrs. Morrison, I specifically ordered a suspension of all fines and penalties related to Mr. Vickers and the associated cases. Can you explain why you issued another violation notice?" Patricia, dressed in a navy suit and looking defiant, responded, "Your Honor, that was a separate violation unrelated to the previous case." "Mrs. Morrison, do you think I am stupid?" The courtroom went silent. "No, Your Honor, because it seems like you think I am stupid. I ordered a suspension while this matter is in mediation, and you immediately issued another citation to the same person for a nearly identical issue. This is contempt of court." Richard Brenner, the HOA's lawyer, stood up. "Your Honor, if I may, I was not consulted before that violation was issued. I advised my client to comply with your order, but she acted independently." "Then your client is a liability, Mr. Brenner. Mrs. Morrison, I am imposing a sanction of $1,000 against you personally, not the HOA, for contempt of court. If you issue any further violations to Mr. Vickers or any member of his group before the mediation is complete, I will hold you in contempt again, and the sanctions will be significantly higher. Do you understand?" Patricia's face was red. "Yes, Your Honor. Furthermore, I am ordering that all decisions by the Saguaro Heights HOA Board regarding violations, fines, or enforcement must be approved by a majority vote, recorded in writing, and provided to opposing counsel before any notices are issued. No more unilateral decisions. Is that clear?" "Yes, Your Honor." Walking out of that hearing felt even better than the first one. Patricia had been publicly reprimanded and fined personally. The power dynamic was shifting. The mediation took place in a conference room at a neutral location in Mesa. A professional mediator named Jennifer Carlson facilitated the discussion. On one side of the table were Robert Kaplan, myself, Marcus Chen, Carol Webster, and Edward Sullivan. On the other side were Patricia Morrison, Deborah Fletcher, Linda Myers, Tom Henderson, George Patterson, and Richard Brenner. Jennifer Carlson started by outlining the goal of mediation: to find a resolution that both sides could agree on without continuing the lawsuit. She asked each side to present their position. Robert went first, concisely outlining the pattern of selective enforcement, the improper procedures, the refusal to consider evidence, and the retaliation. He presented documentation for everything, including side-by-side photos showing identical situations where some residents were cited and others were not. Then, it was the HOA's turn. Richard Brenner spoke, attempting to frame everything as a misunderstanding and a difference of interpretation of the bylaws. Patricia remained silent, her arms crossed, clearly unhappy about being forced to participate. Jennifer Carlson asked questions, probing both sides. After about an hour, she asked Patricia directly, "Mrs. Morrison, can you explain why Mr. Vickers's welding cart was cited as a hazard when a professional welding supply company certified it as safe?" "Because it looked dangerous," Patricia said flatly. "But it was not actually dangerous. It looked dangerous to people who do not know about welding equipment. So your standard for issuing violations is based on appearance rather than facts." Patricia did not answer. Jennifer Carlson let the silence hang for a moment, then turned to the rest of the board. "Does anyone else want to comment on this?" Tom Henderson spoke up. "I have been uncomfortable with the way violations have been handled for a long time. I think we need to reform our procedures and make sure we are being fair and consistent." Linda Myers nodded slightly. "I have felt pressured to vote a certain way on several occasions." Patricia glared at Linda, who looked down at the table. The mediation lasted for 3 hours. By the end, a tentative agreement was reached. The HOA would rescind all fines and violations issued to me and the members of the Homeowners Alliance. The board would adopt new procedures requiring evidence-based determinations for safety-related violations, including consulting with relevant experts when necessary. All violation decisions would require a majority board vote, not just the president's decision. And the HOA would issue a written apology to all affected residents. In exchange, we would drop the lawsuit and agree not to seek damages for the time and stress involved. It was not perfect, but it was a resolution. Robert advised me to accept it. "You have accomplished the main goal," he said. "You will not have to pay fines. They will have to follow better procedures, and you have sent a message to Patricia that she cannot do whatever she wants. If you push for damages, this could drag on for another year." I agreed, and so did the others in the group. We signed the mediation agreement and the lawsuit was formally dropped, but the story did not end there. In October, about a month after the mediation, I received a call from Tom Henderson. He sounded urgent. "Jason, can you meet me somewhere? I need to talk to you in person." We met at a coffee shop in Gilbert, away from the neighborhood. Tom looked stressed, and he ordered a large coffee before sitting down. "I found something, and I do not know what to do with it," he said quietly. "What is it?" "I am the treasurer for the HOA, right? So I have access to all the financial records. Last week, I was reconciling the accounts for the annual audit, and I noticed some irregularities. Money missing, basically." My stomach dropped. "How much?" "Over $20,000 in the last 18 months. "Where did it go?" "That is the problem. I traced it. Patricia has been writing checks to a landscaping company called Desert Oasis Landscaping. The HOA has a landscaping contract with a different company, Green Valley Services. But these checks to Desert Oasis are labeled as special assessments and emergency repairs." I looked up Desert Oasis Landscaping. The owner is Patricia's brother-in-law. I sat back in my chair, processing this. She has been embezzling HOA funds. I think so. Or at least funneling money to a family member's business without proper authorization or competitive bidding. Either way, it is fraud. "Have you told anyone else on the board?" "No. I do not trust Deborah, and Linda is too scared to rock the boat. George will not get involved. I wanted to talk to you first because you have the lawyer and you have experience dealing with this kind of thing now." "Tom, this is serious. This is criminal. You need to report this." "That is why I am coming to you. I do not want to go to Patricia first because she will just cover it up or retaliate against me. But if I go to the police or a lawyer, I need to be sure about what I am alleging." I called Robert Kaplan from the coffee shop. He agreed to meet with Tom that afternoon. After reviewing the financial documents Tom had brought, Robert's assessment was clear. "This is embezzlement and fraud. You need to report this to the Arizona Attorney General's office. They have a division that handles HOA complaints. You should also consider reporting it to the police, though they may refer it to the AG's office anyway since it involves HOA governance." Tom looked pale. "This is going to blow up the whole neighborhood." "Tom, she stole money from every homeowner in that subdivision. You do not have a choice. If you do not report it and it comes out later that you knew, you could be held liable as treasurer." Over the next few days, Tom filed a formal complaint with the Arizona Attorney General's office and also reported it to the Gilbert Police Department. The police took it seriously and opened an investigation. Within a week, detectives were interviewing board members and requesting financial records. Patricia initially refused to cooperate, claiming the records were confidential, but the police obtained a warrant. The investigation moved quickly because the evidence was clear. Patricia had been writing unauthorized checks to her brother-in-law's company for services that were never performed or that were grossly overcharged. In November, Patricia Morrison was arrested and charged with theft, fraud, and misuse of HOA funds. The local news covered it briefly, and the story made rounds on social media among HOA critics. Deborah Fletcher resigned from the board immediately, claiming she had no knowledge of the financial improprieties. Linda Myers and George Patterson stayed on, though both admitted they had not been paying close attention to the finances. Tom Henderson became the interim president, while the HOA organized a special election for new board members. The election, held in December, brought in 3 new members who had been part of our homeowners alliance: Edward Sullivan, Carol Webster, and Marcus Chen. The new board's first action was to conduct a full audit of the HOA's finances and to revise the bylaws to include better oversight and transparency. They also formally rescinded all the questionable violations that had been issued over the past 2 years and refunded fines to residents who had paid them. Patricia's criminal case moved through the court system. In February, she pleaded guilty to theft and fraud charges as part of a plea agreement. She was sentenced to 2 years of probation, required to pay full restitution of the $23,000 she had embezzled, and was permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in Arizona. As for me, my welding cart remained safely stored in my garage when not in use, and I continued my fabrication work without further interference. The new board even amended the bylaws to allow for temporary outdoor storage of work equipment with reasonable notification, acknowledging that some residents worked from home and needed flexibility. One Saturday in March, I was in my garage working on a custom gate for a client when Marcus stopped by. "Hey man, we are having a neighborhood barbecue tomorrow. You should come." "A barbecue? The HOA is hosting it." "Nope, just neighbors. No HOA involvement required. Bring whatever you want. No rules about approved condiments or regulation grill sizes." I laughed. "I will be there." The barbecue was held in Edward Sullivan's backyard, and it felt like the neighborhood had finally exhaled. People were relaxed, friendly, not worried about being cited for having their trash cans out or their grass being a quarter-inch too long. Kids played basketball in driveways. Someone had a work truck parked on the street and nobody cared. Carol Webster brought her husband, who I had not met before. "I just want to thank you," she said. "If you had not stood up to Patricia, the rest of us would probably still be afraid to do anything." "I was just defending my welding cart," I said with a shrug. "You did a lot more than that. You showed us that we did not have to live under someone's arbitrary rules. You made this neighborhood a better place." I thought about that conversation later that evening as I sat on my back patio, watching the Arizona sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. I had not set out to take down a corrupt HOA president or reform an entire neighborhood association. I had just wanted to work on my welding projects in peace. But sometimes standing up for something small leads to something bigger. Sometimes refusing to accept an unjust fine for a torch cart stored outside leads to exposing embezzlement and restoring fairness to an entire community. Sometimes you have to fight, not because you want to, but because giving in would mean accepting that might makes right. My torch cart sat in my garage now, tanks secured properly, regulators in good condition, exactly as they had been when this whole thing started. The difference was that now I lived in a neighborhood where reasonableness and fairness had a chance, where a professional welding supply company's certification that my setup matched their warehouse standards actually mattered, where people were not afraid of vindictive enforcement and arbitrary fines. A few weeks later, I was at Southwestern Welding Supply picking up some supplies when Bill Rodriguez called me over. "Hey Jason, I heard about what happened with your HOA. That is quite a story. It got more complicated than I expected." "I bet. Listen, I want to show you something." He led me to the back warehouse where they stored the large equipment and bulk tanks. "See that setup over there?" He pointed to a welding cart identical to mine. "That has been our standard configuration for 15 years. Safe, efficient, professional. When you told me your HOA was calling it a hazard, I almost could not believe it. These carts are in warehouses, shops, and job sites all over the state. If they were dangerous, we would have known decades ago. I appreciate you writing that letter, Bill. It made a big difference in court. Sometimes people just need an expert to state the obvious. Common sense is not as common as it should be. I thought about that a lot over the following months. The whole situation had been absurd from the start. A welding cart stored outside for 14 hours had somehow become a federal case, leading to lawsuits, court hearings, and ultimately criminal charges against a HOA president. But the absurdity was not in my equipment being outside. The absurdity was in someone deciding that they had the authority to fine me $500 for it without any factual basis. Tom Henderson and I became friends through the whole ordeal. One evening in April, we were sitting in my backyard, grilling burgers and talking about the neighborhood. "You know what the worst part was," Tom said. "I knew Patricia was on a power trip for over a year. I knew she was being unfair, but I did not do anything substantial about it until the financial fraud came out. I was too worried about the consequences. You did what you could. You were the only one voting against her. You came to our meetings even when it put you in a tough spot. I should have done more sooner. A lot of people paid fines they should not have had to pay. But they are getting refunds now, and the new board is fixing things. You made that possible by coming forward with the evidence." He nodded but still looked troubled. "I guess I learned that enabling bad behavior, even passively, makes you complicit. I will not make that mistake again." The Sagaro Heights neighborhood slowly returned to normal, or rather, to a new and better version of normal. The new board was transparent, reasonable, and actually responsive to residents. They sent out a monthly newsletter with financial updates. They held open forums where people could raise concerns. They enforced the bylaws consistently and fairly, with actual evidence and proper procedures. Patricia Morrison's house went up for sale in May. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she and her husband were moving to Tucson. I felt a mix of emotions about that. Part of me was glad she would be gone, but part of me felt sad that it had come to this. She had let power corrupt her judgment, stolen from her neighbors, and destroyed her own reputation in the process. In June, exactly 1 year after this whole thing started, I was working in my garage on a Saturday afternoon when I received an unexpected visitor. It was Richard Brenner, the lawyer who had represented the HOA during the lawsuit. "Mr. Vickers, I hope I am not intruding. I wanted to speak with you briefly if you have a moment." I set down my welding torch and walked to the driveway. "What can I do for you, Mr. Brenner?" I wanted to apologize. I represented the HOA in that dispute, and while I was doing my job as an attorney, I should have pushed back harder against Patricia's instructions. I knew some of the violations were questionable, but I followed my client's directions. That was wrong. I was surprised by his candor. "I appreciate you saying that. I have been practicing HOA law for 15 years, and I have seen a lot of abuse of power, but I have also seen cases where boards are genuinely trying to maintain community standards and property values. The problem is that the legal structure gives boards a lot of power with very little oversight unless someone is willing to fight back like you did. Most people just pay the fines because it is easier than challenging them. So, what happens now? I do not represent Sagaro Heights anymore. After Patricia was charged, I resigned from the case. I am actually considering shifting my practice to represent homeowners against HOAs rather than the other way around. I think there is more need there, and frankly, I sleep better at night." We talked for a while longer, and he gave me his card in case I ever needed legal advice in the future. After he left, I thought about what he had said. The system was broken when it required lawsuits and criminal investigations to stop someone from abusing a position meant to maintain neighborhood standards. But at least the system had worked, eventually. By summer, life in Sagaro Heights had settled into a comfortable rhythm. I continued my welding work, occasionally rolling my torch cart out to the driveway for outdoor projects. Nobody complained. The new board had implemented a simple notification system where residents could send a quick email if they were going to have equipment or materials temporarily outside for a project. It was reasonable, transparent, and respectful. Marcus Chen organized a neighborhood watch program that was actually about safety rather than enforcement. Carol Webster started a community garden in the common area. Edward Sullivan set up a lending library in the community center. The neighborhood was becoming a community in the true sense of the word. In August, I was featured in a local news segment about small business owners who work from home. The reporter asked about the HOA situation, and I gave a brief summary without naming Patricia directly. What would you say to other homeowners who feel like they are being treated unfairly by their HOA? The reporter asked. Document everything. Get expert opinions when relevant. Know your rights under state law, and do not be afraid to stand up for yourself. Most importantly, try to work with reasonable people on your board. There are usually some, even if they are not the loudest voices. Build alliances with your neighbors. Change comes from collective action, not just individual complaints. The segment aired on a Friday evening, and I received dozens of emails and messages from people around Arizona dealing with similar HOA issues. Some of the stories were heartbreaking. People being fined thousands of dollars for minor infractions. Elderly residents being harassed. Families threatened with liens on their homes over paint colors or landscaping choices. I could not help everyone, but I shared Robert Kaplan's contact information and the resources I had learned about. I also created a simple document outlining the steps I had taken, which people could use as a template for their own situations. One message stood out. It was from a woman in Scottsdale who had been fined for having solar panels that the HOA claimed were unsightly, even though Arizona law specifically protects the right to install solar panels. She had been fighting the HOA for 2 years and was on the verge of giving up. After reading about my case, she contacted Robert Kaplan, and he took her case. Last I heard, she won, and her HOA was ordered to rescind the fine and pay her legal fees. That felt good. The whole nightmare with Patricia and the welding cart had somehow turned into something positive, helping other people fight back against unreasonable enforcement. In September, the anniversary of the mediation agreement, the Sagaro Heights HOA held its annual meeting. The new board presented the revised bylaws, which had been completely rewritten with input from residents. The financial audit showed that the HOA was now operating transparently with proper oversight. Attendance at the meeting was the highest it had been in years because people actually trusted that their input would matter. During the open forum section, an older woman I did not recognize stood up. I have lived in this neighborhood for 8 years, and this is the first annual meeting I have attended, she said. I avoided them because I was afraid of being targeted if I said the wrong thing. I just want to thank the new board for creating an environment where we can actually have discussions without fear. There was applause, and several other residents echoed similar sentiments. As I sat in that meeting, listening to neighbors talk about community projects and common-sense solutions to actual problems, I reflected on how far we had come. A year ago, people were afraid to speak up. Now they were actively participating in governance. After the meeting, Tom Henderson pulled me aside. I have some news. Desert Oasis Landscaping, Patricia's brother-in-law's company, filed for bankruptcy. Apparently, the HOA contract was their primary source of income, and when that ended, they could not sustain the business. The brother-in-law is being investigated for tax fraud now too. Wow, this keeps spreading. Corruption usually does. When you pull one thread, the whole thing unravels. As fall turned to winter, I found myself thinking less and less about the whole HOA situation. It had consumed so much of my time and energy for months, but now it was just a story I occasionally told. My welding business was thriving. I had steady clients and interesting projects. The neighborhood was peaceful. In December, I ran into Deborah Fletcher, the former compliance officer at a grocery store. She looked like she wanted to avoid me, but I approached her. "Deborah, how are you?" She looked uncomfortable. "I am okay. Look, Jason, I want to apologize for how I acted. I let Patricia influence me and I went along with things I should not have. I am sorry." "I appreciate that. Why did you go along with it?" She hesitated, then sighed. "Patricia and I were friends, or so I thought. She made me feel important, like I was helping maintain standards. By the time I realized what she was really doing, I felt trapped. I was afraid that if I spoke up, she would turn on me. I know that is not an excuse. At least you are acknowledging it now. That is more than some people would do. I heard you helped that woman in Scottsdale with her solar panel case. That was good of you. I just shared information. She did the hard work." We talked for a few more minutes, and I left the store feeling like another piece had fallen into place. Deborah had made bad choices, but she was human. She had been manipulated by someone she trusted. In some ways, she was a victim too, though she had also been a willing participant in hurting others. The complexity of human behavior and choices had been one of the unexpected lessons from this whole experience. It would have been easy to paint Patricia as a cartoon villain and everyone else as innocent victims. But the reality was more nuanced. People made choices based on fear, loyalty, self-interest, and a dozen other factors. Some people stood up when it mattered. Others stayed silent. Some actively participated in wrongdoing. And some, like Tom, tried to do the right thing within the constraints of their position. As the year came to a close, I found myself grateful for the experience, as strange as that sounds. It had been stressful, expensive, and time-consuming. But it had also shown me the importance of standing up for what is right, even when it is inconvenient. It had connected me with neighbors who became friends. It had taught me about HOA law, civil procedure, and community organizing. And it had reminded me that ordinary people can make a difference when they refuse to accept injustice. My torch cart was still in my garage, still configured exactly the way it had been when this all started. The tanks were properly secured. The regulators were in good condition. The hoses were neatly coiled. It matched the setup used in professional welding supply warehouses, just like Bill Rodriguez had certified. But now, when I wheeled it out to work on a project, I did not worry about violation notices. I did not stress about arbitrary fines. I just did my work, knowing that I lived in a neighborhood where reasonableness had won, where fairness mattered, and where people had the courage to hold their leaders accountable. In January, I received a letter from the Arizona Attorney General's office. It was a formal notification that the case against Patricia Morrison had been closed with her completion of the plea agreement. The letter also mentioned that my cooperation during the investigation had been valuable, and that the restitution funds had been returned to the HOA's accounts. I filed the letter away with all the other documentation from this saga. I kept everything in a banker's box in my office, just in case I ever needed to reference it. But I hoped I never would. Life went on. I welded, I worked, I lived. The neighborhood thrived under new leadership. And somewhere in all of that, a ridiculous situation involving a torch cart stored outside for 14 hours had turned into a catalyst for positive change. Sometimes you do not choose the battles you fight. Sometimes they choose you. And sometimes, when you stand up for something as simple as the right to temporarily store your work equipment outside, you end up changing an entire community. That torch cart never knew it was the start of a revolution, and neither did I when I wheeled it outside that afternoon. But in the end, it matched more than just the warehouse setup at Southwestern Welding Supply. It matched the determination of people who refused to be bullied, the courage of neighbors who stood together, and the principle that power without accountability will always eventually corrupt. And that, more than any vindication in court or any resignation from a board, was the real victory.